things, how to make things. You know, God just spoke things into the steel mill at 19 years old. And they probably put me in one of the most dangerous areas of the steel mill, and that was in the blast furnace department where they made the iron. And started there in 1973 in Jones and Laughlin Steel in Aliquippa, and like I said, it was just a wet behind the ears kid out of high school. Threw me in with a bunch of old men that cussed and swore and chewed and smoked and everything else, you know, but that's another sermon altogether. But it amazed me when I got there because of the things that man can do, you know, the things that man can do. And the things that man can come up with. You know, you mix cinder, you mix coke, which is coal that's burned into like charcoal, and then you dump in iron ore, and then you force in air, oxygen, air into it. That's why it's called a blast furnace, because the air is blasted into it. That all melts together. Then you cast it, and it comes out. Slag goes this way, the iron goes this way, and you got steel. Who came up with that? Who came up with that idea? Who sat in their living room and said, we can do this, we can mix this all together, but we got to build this gigantic thing to do it in. You know, but what, and then they take it to the basic oxygen furnace where they refine it into steel and make it into ingots. And then send it over to the blooming mill and roll it into squares or whatever they want to make. And then in 1994, I transferred down to the hot strip mill where they actually ran the slabs in and made them into coils. And if you're ever driving down the road and you see that great big coil strapped on the back of the truck, that's what, and Ed probably hauled those a lot, and that's what we made there. And you're probably asking, you know, how being a disciple is going to get me into the history of the steel industry, but I have a question for you a little bit later on. But 1980, the steel industry just went away in Pennsylvania. I mean, it was like a ghost town, it really was. So when we moved over here, I finally did get a job at another steel place. It was Youngstown, it was North Star Steel here in Youngstown. And I was amazed because somebody came up with the idea, we don't have to do any of that process that you were doing down there in Aliquippa. We can just burn scrap into liquid steel and we can pour it into a ladle and then run it through a tundish box, which is a box underneath, and it runs it into molds that are water cooled. You dump that molten steel in there, the shell gets hard around it, and you just keep, and then you roll it out, and it just comes right out in rounds or squares. Amazing. But then one night I was working I was a ladleman is what I was. And I took care of the bottom of the ladles where they changed the gates in the ladles. And some of you probably have already heard this story, but they were having a bad night. We were on 12 hours. I was working 12 hours and the craneman was working 12 hours. And that's because of vacations in the summertime, so we all had to do our share. And they lost 2 casts on the caster, and what that means is the outer shell breaks and then the steel just pours down into the basement where it's running out. So they have to shut it down and have to start all over again. So we did that. We were having a really bad time, and we lost 2 casts. So my job was when the craneman brought the tundish box down off the top of the caster, I'd set it in the pit. We had a turner that we put it in. Once it cooled, then we would dump it, it would be an ingot, and we'd throw it back into the furnace. We lost 2 of them, so I had to set the box in the pit. That's a picture of one of them there. Actually, we had 3 strands pouring, but the reason I'm getting here is that night I set it in the pit, and it had hooks on it like this on the side, and the chains had round things on it hooked in them hooks. And the craneman, I would just unhook the one side, and the craneman would lower the chains and then just drop off the other side. It would fall off. Well, when I turned around to walk away, I heard the chain click. So I knew he caught one of those chains, and I didn't know whether it was the front one or the back one, but I knew if I don't get out of here, I'm going to get covered with molten steel. So I took off running, and there was about a 16-inch step I had to go up over. And if you've ever walked out of your garage on a sunny day, and your eyes have to adjust from you being in the garage. Well, that's the way it was, because it was shining right behind me. And I hit my head on a beam, knocked my hard hat down on, pushed my hard hat down on my head so far it broke my safety glasses. And luckily I fell forward, but I was unconscious. And I ruptured 2 discs in my neck. But it could have been a lot worse. I could have been killed. I thought I was dead. I really did. that was it. You know, and that's why I'm bringing this up, because how many here has ever been in a situation where you thought you were going to die? I mean, actually thought physically, yeah, Timmy's shaking his head. He's been there because he thought he was going to die. Yeah. You think you're going to die. You know, you might be laying in a hospital bed and something might happen, you know. But the idea is death is coming, okay? And the reason I said all that is because what are the things you think about when you think you're going to die? My thoughts were, and I get emotional about this because these thoughts ran through my mind. I thought about my kids. I thought about my wife. What's going to become of them? You know, because I'm not there. You know. And then I even just lately something happened that really brought this on to begin with. In Hawaii, they got the sirens. The sirens went off and said, we're going to be struck by a ballistic missile. You know, they had maybe 15, 20 minutes to decide where they were going to go. What do you do? You know, what do you do? The one guy I read about, he called his kids. It was on the mainland. He called them and told them it was happening. You know, and it was going to die. That he was going to die. You know, because it was radiation too. You know, they didn't know whether it was going to burn to death from radiation or burn to death from the initial blast. You know, they didn't know. But the idea is those things run through your mind, and you know, you wonder. You have to wonder to yourself, what would you do? You know, like me, I had a split second to think of what I had to do to get to safety, and luckily you know, and it's a funny part, but it's not funny at all. But they took me to the hospital in the ambulance, and they had to call another one for the crane because he thought he killed me. Yeah, he was screaming over the PA, "Get down in the pit! I killed Doug." It's what he said because he thought he dumped it on top of me. He thought he crushed me or burned me to death, you know. I mean, it's kind of comical, but, you know, the emotions, you know what I'm saying? And that's the things that take over. But we have to, I don't want to think about death all the time, but we have to think about where are we going to go? Where are we going to end up when we die? What's going to happen when we die? And I think that's why, one of the main reasons why we're afraid of death. Because we really don't know. We don't, you know, it's the unknown. I mean, let's face it. We're not told enough about it, you know. And, you know, you might get a bad report from the doctor. You know, you just, those people in Hawaii spent 37 gut-wrenching minutes waiting for that thing to hit. 37 minutes before they got the all clear, saying it was all clear. I turned 65 last December. You know, you get the usual cards. Get the gifts. But then the snide remarks come, you know, like, hey, you wearing diapers yet? You know, or here's some Metamucil will make you move. You know, those kind of things. But one thing I did realize after I turned 65 is I have, you know, after the balloons are deflated and the cards are read, I have more years behind me than I have in front of me. So if you think about that, it's a scary thought. And you don't know, I mean, you don't know, you know, you're young, but you still don't know how long you're going to live. You know, we don't know. You know, with the study, we studied about it this morning about the king that was given 15 more years to live because he prayed to God. But we don't know that's going to be possible for us. In Hebrews 9:27 it says, and as it is appointed for man to die once, but after this, the judgment. And someday, me and you are going to stand in front of, take this in, we're going to stand in front of the being that created us. He's the being that I've been praying to. I hope you have too. He's the being that I work for. He's the being that I've preached to all these years, preached about all these years. And now when all things are done, He's going to judge us. Just take a moment and think about that. What can I do for God for my salvation? Nothing. We can't do a thing. God is going to give us salvation through probably the most powerful gift, through grace. Through grace. Now, a lot of people take this verse out of context to use it, but I'm going to read it here. Ephesians 2, 8 through 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourself, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Anyone should boast. Now I want to ponder there for a moment. Say God come down and said, I'm going to give you 1%. You have to do 1% for me in order to make it to heaven. And then the other 99% will be mine. But see, what we have to wrap our minds around is that's not the way God operates. It is 100% God. Do we work for God? Yes. We have to do things for God. We have to do all the things that we can. We cannot earn our way into heaven. No way, shape, or form. As humans, we would like to. We would like to work and we would like to do that, but we can't. In Luke 10, 25 through 28, there's a story about this. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, You have answered rightly. Do this, and you shall live. Now we don't know what the guy's motives were. In fact, he may have been plotting with the Pharisees. The Pharisees been saying, Go in here and trap that guy. Let's trap him so he blasphemes, and we can commit him to death. Is what we can do. Which they did anyway. But they were trying anything and everything that they could to get Jesus. So Jesus answered the guy, and this is really good here. I love the way he did this. He answers the guy with a question, which he always did to Pharisees too. Every time they asked him a question, he asked them a question back. And then they had to think, they had to really think about it. He says, the lawyer asked him the question, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? But I think he may have had other motives. I think maybe he was thinking. Maybe he had his 40th birthday. Maybe he thought he was getting a little bit closer to death. You know what I mean? He was young, but maybe he thought about that. And that may have been what made him ask that question. But then again, it could have been the Pharisees too. But the Bible doesn't tell us. We're just speculating, But maybe he's just thinking about how short life really is. We don't want to think about how short life is because we really don't know. But I'm 65 and I don't know where the time went. I really don't. And the older I get, the faster it just keeps going. But he did answer rightly. He told Jesus, he said, Jesus said, what is written in the law? What is your reading of it? What is your understanding of it? And that's when he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, right on, that's the right answer. Very simple, right? Very easy, right? No, it's not too easy. Jesus is saying that a right relationship with God is loving God with all your heart. If that relationship is right with God, then you can love your neighbor as yourself. If it's not, you're not going to be able to. Very simple, not easy, but very simple. But we fall, and sometimes we fall hard. I read a story about a preacher that got hired at a church, and he was preaching there for a couple of years. And then they came to find out that on his previous job he embezzled $80,000 from the church. All the diplomas that he gave them and all the credentials he gave him were all bogus. They were all phony. So the people were and then the IRS was after him too. They were at his heels too after him. But the people liked him and the church was growing. The people were very surprised, so they questioned the men that hired him. They said, "Why did you hire him?" Not knowing all this stuff was behind him. And the only thing that they could say was they were swayed by his unusual ability to communicate the gospel. What gospel? The gospel where you cheat everybody, you get out of hell free card, and then you go about your life the way you want. How do these people live with themselves when they do these things? And then the other question we have to ask is, how do you fall into that lifestyle? They think they're forgiven by Jesus without following Jesus. And if you ask me how I can explain it, I can't explain it. I can't explain how they can do that. What are the essentials of becoming a disciple of Christ and staying a disciple? And I think there's two things we need to do. There's two things we have to do to become a disciple, and that is we have to have a renovation of our heart and a renovation of our mind. And when we renovate something, what do? We clean it all out and start over, usually, when we're doing that. Your heart must be transformed and your mind must be transformed. Being a disciple, what does that mean? We could throw that word around freely because we are disciples. We're all disciples of Christ. If you're a Christian, you're a disciple of Christ. So, but we throw that word around, but what does it actually mean? Is it memorizing maybe 100 Bible verses a year? Is it coming to all the services and all the classes? Those things are all good. And they describe how you become a disciple. They do not tell us what a disciple of Christ is. In Jesus' day, it meant attaching yourself to a rabbi that you liked, and you would sit at his feet and learn of all the learning that he had, and then you would follow his lifestyle and live like him. And there's a lot of people out there today that believe, they think and even believe it's possible to live like Christ without ever being in Christ. In other words, you're a good person. You're a good person. If you've never been immersed in the waters of baptism and coming in contact with that cleansing blood, then you really can't be a disciple of Christ. And that's no matter what man has said. And a lot of men say you don't need to be baptized. No reason for it. As I've preached and preached and preached, read your Bibles. Know what it says for yourself. Don't let someone else tell you. Because your soul salvation depends on it. Jesus tells us that those good people will get a surprise of their life on Judgment Day. And you know how you read a verse, and you read a verse, and you read a verse, and nothing, and it just doesn't click, and then all of a sudden you read it, and it clicks. I read this verse the other day, and I really thought about it. I'm going to read it to you. Matthew 7, 22 through 23. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have I not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. What people were Jesus talking about there? Is he talking about Satanists? People that worship Satan? He talking about people that drink animals' blood and have rituals like that or anything like that? This is what dawned on me. He's talking about good people. He's talking about people that act good, live good. He's talking about them. But what else is he talking about? I never knew you because you never became a disciple of mine. All you did was go through the motions. That's all you did. Then they're told at the end of that verse, I never knew you. And then he says, even worse yet, depart from me. You're going to be separated from me for eternity. Now I have a question. How important is it to know how to get into Christ? Is there an importance there? Is there a something that is pressing that you really have to do in order to get into Christ? Or can you just be a good person? And I know a lot of them. I know a lot of good people. We looked at the Great Commission last week in my sermon. And I want you to remember what I'm saying now. Frankly, in the whole New Testament, you can't find one person after the resurrection that became a Christian without being immersed in the waters of baptism. Not one person. Out of all of them. Now, do you think baptism is important? Do you think being immersed is important? And our relationship with God is, I guess the only thing I can actually compare it to is a marriage relationship. And if a marriage relationship comes to the point where you say to yourself, boy, I wish it was like it was when we first got married. And you're both saying that, guess how that marriage is going to end up? Same with God. We have to make sure that we're renewing it and refreshing it daily. Just like we have to do with our marriages. And our relationships with our friends, come right down to it. Bill Covan told me a long time ago, him and his wife used to go out every Friday night together. And then they'd even go get a motel somewhere and stay. He said, you have to do that, you have to work your marriage, and if you're going to keep it going, you have to work it. And that's what you have to do. And you have to communicate. Same thing we have to do with God, right? We have to read the rule book. Now, the woman usually makes the rules, guys, so make sure you read her rule book, okay? So you're on the same page. And I'm just kidding, though, because it is, and it is a fabulous relationship, let's face it. You have somebody to be with you and go through all the things you go through, And that relationship has to be worked on just like the one for God. And in closing, we need to obey Christ in every area of our lives. Working on making it fresh and new always. And how you freshen it up is you study the Bible. That's how you freshen it up. And you communicate with God. That's how you... He wants us to pray to Him. He wants us to talk to Him about everything. I don't care what it is. If I'm working on something and it don't go right, I just stop for a moment and I pause and I say, Lord, help me figure out how to get this and how to make it work right. And it's just like when I'm searching for a verse, I pray about it. It's not a miraculous thing. It doesn't pop up on the computer screen. Doug has to use his noodle and say, well, I can research it this way. Let me research it. And then usually I can find it. But our relationship with God should be the most important thing in our lives. And nothing on this earth should ever come between us and God. And we let a lot of things do that, believe me. I've done it myself. But do you want to be a disciple of Christ this morning? If the answer is yes, and I'm saying this to myself too, then prove it. Go out and do what he wants you to do. Go out and speak with people. Use the opportunities you have to invite. All those things we have to do. It's the only way the church is going to grow, and it's the only way that we're going to do the work for God. We have to do God's work. If there's anybody here this morning who would need baptized, we could do that for you. Or if you've fallen and you need prayers, you've done something that you need prayers for, we can pray for you also, pray with you. And I hope we pray for each and every one of us every day. Pray for each other so we can get stronger. Because Satan's there. He's working overtime. He's working overtime on us because he don't have us. He don't care about the guy that's sitting in the bar or doing the bad things. He don't care about him because he's already got him or her. But God's got us and he wants us back. The devil wants us back. If you have a need, please come as we stand and sing.
What will you do with Jesus, the precious